Welcome back to Velshi and Rule. We're about 6 hours out from the second Democratic presidential debate, and one 2020 candidate who will be on that stage is former Congressman from Maryland, John Delaney. He joins me now live from Detroit. Congressman, you are in the final few hours, so let's talk strategy. You are currently polling in the single digits across the board. In the last debate, you got a lot of points in there. They even criticized you for interrupting, but you didn't break through in the polling numbers. What are you going to do tonight?
Well, listen, Stephanie, it's a long race, and tonight I plan on making it clear to the voters that there's a real contrast. There's a bunch of people running on impossible promises, and that's going to get Donald Trump reelected. And then there's folks like myself who are running on real solutions, and that's how we win the election. So that, I think, is the big theme of tonight's debate, which is in a great place, Detroit, by the way, because you can in many ways tell the whole story of this country through the lens of Detroit and what's happened here in the last few years about how the government and the private sector have worked well together to actually turn this great city around. So I think we'll talk about those kind of issues, too. So I think it's going to be a great night.
So are you going to focus on economics? Because President Trump won the state of Michigan with an economic promise to bring jobs back, get people paid more, and have those forgotten Americans remembered.
Right, and he's failed at doing that. Because the way you actually create jobs in this country is you create the kind of environment where businesses invest. And that's where we have to be as a Democratic Party. We have to have pro-business, pro-growth, pro-job policies. And that's what's going to win us 2020. And again, that's why Detroit is such a good example. I spent all morning with a bunch of entrepreneurs. There's a group here called Entrepreneurs of Color, who are these great entrepreneurs who are investing in Detroit and turning the city around. And that's where we got to focus. How we're going to create jobs, how we're going to increase people's pay, how we're going to build infrastructure, how we're going to fix healthcare, how we're going to make public education better. These are the kind of kitchen table issues that matter to American families. And that's got to be our focus as a party. If we run on all this extreme stuff, we're not going to win.
Like the meeting you had this morning, you have got this rollout, a commitment to Black America, where your plan is to pledge to help the African-American community, just as you said. But again, the issue is you're polling in the negative. How are you going to convince them to buy your idea?
Well, listen, Stephanie, I think it's still pretty darn early. I think most Americans are just starting to dial in. We've got 12 debates. This is the second one. The only thing that really matters is when people caucus in Iowa and they primary in New Hampshire, which is not for half a year or more. So, listen, I just think there's a long way to go, and we're prepared for the long race. And I think the message that I'm running on is really important, and it's what we win on. And so, you know, I'm not paying too much attention to the polls right now. I'm paying attention to what the message I'm giving to people and how we actually beat Trump in 2020. And most importantly, how do we improve the lives of our citizens? So many Americans continue to struggle. So many Americans have so much economic anxiety. And that's what I'm running on, those kind of solutions. And I'm pretty confident that's what matters to most Americans, and it's going to cut through.
Are you prepared to go head-to-head on health care with Bernie Sanders tonight? The last time you and I spoke, you said this Medicare for all idea that involves getting rid of private insurance. If the Democratic candidate supports that idea, they will lose in the general by 9 points. Do you plan to have this debate this evening with Bernie Sanders?
Yes, I hope to. Healthcare is the #1 issue facing the American people. It's the issue they care the most about. And Medicare for all is a really bad plan, right? It's bad policy and it's terrible politics. And I think this is an important thing to be debating with Senator Sanders, who came up with this idea, and with the rest of them, like Senator Warren and the rest of, probably half the field is basically outsourced their plan to him. And this is something we need to be debating because we won the 2018 midterms on health care. If we run on Medicare for all, which is Senator Sanders' plan, I think we'll lose in 2020. And not just the White House, by the way. The Senate and the House, I think, will be in play for Republicans if we run on Medicare for all.
Let's talk Baltimore for a second. Maryland, obviously your home state. The president attacking Baltimore, saying that politicians have been stealing billions of dollars for years. What can you tell us, if in any way there's any truth to that? And if you were the president, what you would do for not just Baltimore, but for lots of struggling cities?
Well, listen, his comments are shameful. He doesn't know what he's talking about, and he divides the American people. You know, as president, I'm going to represent every American. whether they're in an inner city or a rural community. And I'm going to do things to try to help them and invest in their communities, put in place policies to encourage people to invest and create jobs. That's what he should be doing. He should go up to Baltimore and he should sit down with the leaders there and say, how do we do infrastructure to help your city? How do we do that in a smart way? He should do what I did this morning, which is sit around with entrepreneurs. He says he's a business leader, although I haven't seen any of that since he's been in the White House. Why doesn't he try to help encourage innovation and entrepreneurship in these cities? As president, I'm going to be unifier. I'm going to represent every American. I'm not going to engage in what he's doing. I mean, he knows these cities aren't going to vote for him, so he doesn't care about them. And that, at its core, is what's wrong with him as our president. He doesn't think about his job as the president, which is to represent every American and try to bring us together every day. He thinks it's about him, and he engages in divisive politics. He should be doing this entirely different. And what I'll do as president is I've got plans to invest in both inner cities and rural communities, because they're both suffering from a lack of investment, both public investment and private investment. So there's not a lot of good jobs being created in many of these places. Healthcare is under pressure in many of these places. Their infrastructure is crumbling in many of these places. And he promised to fix some of this. He didn't. I will as president.
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.